Ditch those clowns and jokers. Join me in the middle with your independent minds. All you've got to do is click the subscribe button and ring that little bell, and you'll then get the most independent presentations on all of YouTube. Thanks for watching.
Your response when you see children wearing masks as they play should be no different from your response to seeing someone beat a kid in Walmart. Call the police immediately. Contact Child Protective Services.
That man is a coward. So says my guest, Dr. Arthur Caplan, who is the doctors William F. and Virginia Connolly Mitty, professor and founding head of the Division of Medical Ethics at the New York School of Medicine in New York City at Langone. Dr. Caplan joins me now and wrote those words for Smerconish.com. Of course, whether you are vaccinated is my business, says Dr. Caplan. Thanks for coming back to the program, Dr. Caplan.
Hey, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Why is Tucker Carlson a coward?
When asked on his TV show, "Are you vaccinated?" he waffled, he wouldn't answer, and then he went into a kind of a digression and said, well, if I asked the questioner about his sex life, if you want to talk about that, that would be inappropriate. Was sort of hinting that being vaccinated is like asking what you're doing in the bedroom. Look, he's a highly influential guy. A lot of his viewers are waffling about vaccination. And I think whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, you should have the courage of your convictions and say so. What is this idea that somehow in the middle of a plague with over 600,000 dead, it's not my business whether you're vaccinated?
In other words, Ben Smith, I think the history is that Ben Smith at the Times asked Tucker Carlson whether he himself was vaccinated. And Carlson's response was to say, well, let me ask you about sex positions with your wife. Or maybe what he said was, that's akin to you asking me about sex positions with somebody's wife. I don't know. I'm getting confused. You say, wait a minute, infectious disease is the issue here, and that actually has applicability to sex. Explain.
Well, look, what Carlson said was, you wouldn't ask me and I wouldn't ask you about the intimate details of what's going on with my wife in the bedroom. Fair enough. But if you had a casual acquaintance, Michael, not a trusted partner, there are questions you'd expect to get honestly answered, like, do you have syphilis? Do you have HIV? Do you have gonorrhea? Do you have herpes? There are all kinds of people asking those questions and expecting honest answers when they go on dates and meet up online and so forth. And they have a right to expect an honest answer. You don't want to put yourself at risk. Look, asking about HIV status, it's criminalized in 45 states not to reveal it. If you got somebody infected and didn't tell them you were HIV positive, it's against the law. COVID is a contagious disease. It kills, and it's killed a lot of us. There are many people out there who are vulnerable to COVID. Newborn babies, no immunity. People who had a transplant, cancer treatment, immune diseases, the very old. They have a right, or their, if you will, their moms, their kids have a right to know, are you vaccinated? And again, I'm going to say it, why would you waffle the answer? What are you ashamed of?
So more broadly than Tucker Carlson, what are the practical implications of what Dr. Arthur Caplan is saying?
I think we should expect, well, look, some people say you can't even ask me. It violates some notion of federal privacy law. It doesn't. Federal privacy laws apply to what doctors can say, what hospitals can say, what insurance companies can say. If I ask Michael Smerconish, are you vaccinated? Perfectly within
Yes.
my right to ask. He gave an answer. If you ask me, yes, there's nothing wrong with asking. Obviously, I can't legally compel you to answer, but morally, ethically, at a time, again, of a deadly plague, which we're not out of, despite what all our politicians seem to be saying, I'd say we're kind of at halftime. If I want you in my house, if I want you at my school, if I want to sit next to you on a train or a plane or a cruise, I'd like to know your vaccination status. And that seems to me, I'm not saying you have to get vaccinated. You may choose not, but if you're not vaccinated, there are a lot of reasons I might want to know so that I can protect myself, my loved ones, my kids. I'm going to say it again. why wouldn't we expect in the middle of an infectious disease plague to get an honest answer? Somehow this has gotten tied up in the idea that it's my information, it's my privacy, it's my right. Yeah, that's true about diabetes. That's true about melanoma. You're not going to give it to me. But if you have something, TB, if you have something, COVID, that you can impact me on, I'm kind of expecting an honest answer about vaccination.
There have been, to my mind, very few circumstances where you've needed to offer proof of vaccination, but two that stand out: the Foo Fighters at Madison Square Garden and Springsteen coming back to Broadway, which began last weekend. And each of them, Dr. Caplan, drew an anti-vax crowd of protesters. Do you think that
Right.
that's created some of the hostility that causes people not to want to have to say they are or they are not?
Somewhat. Dave Chappelle put on a show not far from where I am today in Connecticut. Not only did he want your vaccination status, everybody to get in there had to take an instant test, Michael. You know, you had to prove negative before you could get in, and they were turning people away who wouldn't test. People don't like to be told where they can go and where they can't go. They don't have any right to go to the Foo Fighters. They don't have any right to go to Bruce Springsteen. They don't have any right to take a cruise. Your boss, your employer, the cruise line can say, if you're not vaccinated, you're not coming here. So obviously some people aren't answering the question because they fear maybe that's going to restrict my liberty. Maybe that's going to restrict where I can go, where I can enter. It might. But again, if you're, taking a stance here and you're saying, I don't want to vaccinate, I don't need to vaccinate, don't tell me it's none of my business. And don't tell me that the guy sitting next to me at a concert, it doesn't matter to me whether he's vaccinated or not. I do care. And I think I have a right to know.
If you can give it to me, I think is what Dr. Caplan is saying. If you can give it to me, then I need to know, I have a right to know whether you've been vaccinated. It's that simple.
It's pretty simple. I'd say the same thing about, did you get a flu shot? Have you had other protection against infectious disease? I'll repeat it again, 600,000 plus dead, an enormous pandemic that isn't over, new variants coming around. Vaccinate, not vaccinate, your choice. Answer the question because it matters whether you can infect me.
Today, you're at NYU Langone. Previously, you were at the University of Pennsylvania. You know that Penn is one of those campuses where they're mandating that everybody be vaccinated to come back to campus in the fall.
And I favor that. I think particularly for healthcare workers, we've seen some battles in Texas and elsewhere where they've said, we don't want to do that. I think they have to do that. They're dealing with high-risk populations, people who've had bone marrow transplants, people who have had cancer. Their immune systems are very weak. We know that major outbreaks took place in hospitals and nursing homes from the staff. Your duty is protect others, do no harm, put patient interests first. That means you ought to be vaccinated if you're a healthcare worker. And I'm going to predict, Michael, the whole country will be swinging in that direction by the end of the year. We're going to see a lot more places pushing for mandatory COVID vaccination for doctors, nurses, healthcare workers.
I've been surprised at the number, meaning too few employers who are mandating. The law firm, Dr. Caplan, where I'm associated, mandates that people be vaccinated with the proper exceptions if you have a sincere religious belief or if there's a medical reason why you cannot. But I think the firm is the exception rather than the rule.
Well, there are a couple other businesses. I think Morgan Stanley announced yesterday they were going to go to an all vaccinated workforce and you had to stay home if you wouldn't vaccinate. What I think is holding us up, Michael, is the vaccines are still under what's called emergency use authorization, not fully licensed. That's a little crazy because we have data that shows they're safe and effective on hundreds of millions of Americans. Never had data like that, but technically not to licensure. We're going to see licensing, I'm going to say probably September, maybe October. Pfizer and Moderna will get fully licensed. That's the trigger when you're going to start seeing a lot more employers saying, you have to be vaccinated to come into the office, have to be vaccinated to be part of the sales force. I think it will expand as soon as we get to licensure.
For what it's worth, to go back to where we began, I think that Tucker Carlson is probably playing a game and trying to cultivate the audience from that fringe crowd of anti-vaxxers and doesn't want to alienate them, wants them in the tent, and therefore doesn't want to answer the question because maybe it's an answer that is at odds with what they hope.
Yeah, I agree. But again, in the middle of a plague, probably a bad idea to be milking a particular position about COVID, whether it's phony information about masks, deprecating vaccines, just for the ratings. That isn't the responsible thing to do. It's a dangerous thing to do. As I said, it's a culpable thing to do. That's why I said I think he can be classified into the ranks of cowards. If all you're doing is ducking questions about your own vaccination status because you don't want to get into it with your audience, I don't know. That's not the kind of brave, shall we say, talk show host I might want to be listening to.
Dr. Caplan, thank you as always. I appreciate your willingness to write on this subject and to stop by and explain it further.
Hey, thanks, Michael, and I'm glad we're all vaccinated. So that's progress.